So, dear students, in this video you are going to study about the second semester of your syllabus, the development and organizations of brain in vertebrates and also the comparative account of the brain in the vertebrates. So, let us understand the important about the nervous system. Nervous system is one of the master communicating as well as the conducting system of our body. It mainly consists of the neurons or the nerve cells. So, they chiefly passes the impulses either through the chemical or an electrical impulse throughout our body. So, this nervous system is an ectodermal in origin and which are found from the lower invertebrates to the higher mammals. So, in case of hydra, the nervous system is produced into a loose network of system, whereas in higher organisms like mammals, they are organized into a specific brain or the central nervous system. So, which are an ectodermal origin. So, dear students, let us learn about how these nervous systems have developed in the vertebrates. So, the nervous system developed mainly by the ectodermal cells. So, during the embryonic development, the embryo undergoes an repeated cell division called as a cleavage. After the cleavage, it undergoes an blastula and the blastula process leads into an gastrulation. During the process of gastrulation, there is an repeated cell divisions get organized into three important germ layers, the ectoderm, endoderm as well as the mesoderm. So, the ectodermal layer which get organized on the dorsal region produce itself into a nervous system or the central nervous system or the brain. During the gastrulation process, the organization of these three germ layers, that is the ectoderm, endoderm as well as the mesoderm, the ectodermal region produces itself into an plate like structure, a masses of cells that are produced itself into a plate like structure called as the neural plate. During the process of this gastrulation, the neural plates that are produced will further undergo cell division, forming an folds at the either edge of the neural plate. This folds enlarges itself and then joins leaving behind and what are called as a groove called as the neural groove. The neural groove gets separated from the upper layer of the ectodermal region, forming a tube like structure called as the neural tubes. So, this process of formations of the neural tube is called as the neurulation or neurogenesis. The neural tube which are surrounded by the surrounding epidermal cells which are also produced into a cavity called as the neurocele. So, which gets sinks down and then develops into an nervous system. With the development of the embryo, this neural cells enlarges itself into a club shaped structure called as an encephalon. This encephalon is a club shaped structure that develops into the brain. So, the anterior regions of the encephalon enlarges into forming and primary vesicles with the cell divisions and also with the what are called as the repeated cell divisions. The anterior region enlarges itself into forming and three important regions, and the regions where the cell do not undergo and division, they form and constrictions. So, there is three important regions primarily that we can see are called as the primary vesicles. The one is the forebrain, that is nothing but the procephalons, the midbrain, that is nothing but the mesocephalons, and hindbrain, that is the rhambocephalons. Further, with the development as well as of the embryo and also with the cell divisions, you can see there is a further divisions of these three primary vesicles, which forms into an secondary vesicles. These primary vesicles like forebrain, that is the procephalon, divides itself into an anterior telencephalon as well as the posterior diencephalon. The mesencephalon remains undivided, whereas the hindbrain or the rhambocephalon divides into an anterior mesocephalons as well as the posterior metacephalons. Finally, there are 5 different vesicles which are formed, which are completely seen as an nervous system or central nervous system or the brain. The nervous system is divided into 2 types. The central nervous system, which consists of the brain as well as the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which contains the spinal as well as the cranial nerves. Now, let us understand different parts of our brain. So, brain is one of the largest organ of our body. On an average, it weighs about 1600 grams in case of male and 1450 grams in case of females. So, which are found embedded, enclosed within the bony shield called as the cranium. There is a covering between the brain as well as the cranium by what are called as the meninges. The meninges are 3 types, that is the anterior meninges are called as the pia mater and arachnoid as well as the dura mater. They are richly supplied with blood vessels and also are highly vascularized. The brain, which is the largest part of our body, are supplied with millions of the neurons. This brain is divided into 3 important regions: the forebrain, midbrain as well as the hindbrain. Forebrain is made up of cerebrum as well as the diencephalon. So, the cerebrum is the largest part of the brain, which nearly covers about 85% mass, total mass of the brain, which is oval in structure, and they are divided into 2 lobes, which are called as cerebral hemispheres. So, these cerebral hemispheres are divided by a deep fissures called as the longitudinal median cerebral fissure. So, this longitudinal median cerebral fissures separates the 2 cerebral hemispheres. The 2 cerebral hemispheres are connected by an tuft of nerve cells called as crura cerebrae. Each cerebrum is divided into what are called as numerous fissures. Among them, the fissures of Ronald and the Salvian fissures are very prominent, which divides the brain into different lobes. Then, the superficial region of the brain is called as the cortex, the cerebral cortex, which measures about 2 to 4 millimeters in their length. This superficial region are grey in color because of the presence of the numerous neuronal cells, and that is why they are called as the grey matter. This grey matter are found into numerous folds or convolutions called as the gyri. So, this gyri, which are deeper fissures, separates from one gyri to the another gyri, is called as the salvus. So, the salvus, which separates the 2 different gyries, and then there are numerous fissures which are also seen within the what we call as the brain, called as the Salvian fissures or the deep fissures, which separates the brain into different lobes. So, accordingly, there are 5 different lobes or formed. One is the olfactory frontal lobes, The another one is the parietal lobes, and then the temporal lobes as well as the olfactory lobe, and the fifth lobe is the insular, or we also call as the islands of Rheal, which are hidden within the Salvian fishes. The two hemispheres are connected with each other, which are called as corpus callosum. So, below this corpus callosum, the main functions of the cerebral cortex along with the cerebellum, which contains mainly and functioning like an intelligence, consciousness, memory, learning as well as judgment. So, these are the main important functions of the cerebrum. So, this cerebrum, which also found to act as a contralateral in function. That means the right side of the what are called as the cerebrum is functioning as the lifting of the left side of the hand. So, thereby there is an contralateral function within the opposite sides of our body. So, then at the lateral sides of the cerebrum there is a small lobes like structure called as an olfactory lobes, which are found embedded within the cerebral region with the stalk, which are responsible mainly as an olfactory in function. That means sensing of a smell, which are having and receptors in the nasal region. So, dear students, let us move on to the diencephalon. Diencephalon is a part of the brain that are hidden between the cerebral hemisphere. So, diencephalon are having and three important regions which are bilaterally symmetrical. So, these three important regions are thalamus, hypothalamus as well as the epithalamus. So, thalamus is a small oval regions of the side walls of the third ventricle that are having mainly the functioning of what is called as more number of the gray bodies. Below the thalamus is the hypothalamus, which is having an oval shaped and pearl shaped structure called as the mammary gland, which widens the hypothalamus. This hypothalamus are also innervated with the cross branding of the optical nerves called as the optical chiasma. So, this optical chiasma are produce itself into an side walls of an what is called as antenna like structure called as an infundibulum, which are having an posterior region of the mammary gland as well as the optical chiasma leads into an pituitary gland, which finally forms into an pituitary organs. So, the pituitary organs are having the main regulatory hormones which can regulates numerous hormones of our body. Then coming to epithalamus. The epithalamus is at the roof of the cerebral hemisphere that are found near the what is called as the lateral side of the epithalamus. The epithalamus form roof of the cerebral hemisphere that produces itself into an oval structure that having what we call as the pineal body or the pineal gland. So, do you know what is the functions of the pineal body? This pineal body produces an hormone called as the melatonin. So, this melatonin is mainly responsible for the circadian rhythm, that is sleep wake responses. So, this main functions of the what we call as the diencephalon is they are having the main regulatory hormones and like ADH and also the oxytocin, which are responsible for the absorption of the water and also the contractions of the uterine respectively. The pineal glands which produces an circadian hormones, and also diencephalon is mainly involved in the emotional responses and activities. So, dear student, let us all move on to the midbrain or the mesocephalon. Midbrain is the part of a small brain portion that connects between the forebrains as well as the spinal cord. So, this midbrain is having an transverse bands of the nerve cells called as the crura cerebrae. So, the midbrain is produced itself into an two what we call as the four important lobes of an optical lobes, which are also called as the corpus callosum. The dorsal region of the midbrain produces itself into an four lobes which we call as the cerebral quadrigenum. So, this cerebral quadrigenum is also called as the optical lobe. Superior what we call as the regions that are found lobes are called as the superior caliculi. Then the regions which are found below these two lobes are called as the inferior caliculi. The superior caliculi, which is having an functioning of an visual reflexes, this visual reflexes which connects between the ear as well as the neck region, whereas the inferior caliculi which connects between what we call as the eye as well as the neck region. So, these are the two important optical lobes that are found. Moving on to the hindbrain, this or rhombocephalon, this hindbrain are having and three important regions: the cerebellum, pons as well as the medulla oblongata. The cerebellum is the region which are found behind the our head. So, it is having and two important lobes which are divided by an median cerebral fissures. These lobes that are connected internally by an what we call as vermi. So, each hemispheres of the cerebellum thrown into an folds or thrown into an fold like structure called as folia. This cerebellum is also having an tree like structure, the branches, and these branches are arbori of vitae, that is nothing but the tree of life. The main functions of the cerebellum is what the action oriented function, that means lifting of the water from the table and for drinking, and also it is having various voluntary in functions. Now, move on to pons. Pons meaning an bridge which connects the cerebrum into the spinal cord. So, this pons is having two important nerves. The one transverse nerves which connects between the cerebrum and also with the spinal cord, and whereas the longitudinal nerves which connects the nerves from the pons into the spinal cord. Thereby, this pons mainly behave as an bridging between the hindbrain as well as the forebrain. This pons is also having and various functions like rhythmic activity during the breathing. Now, we move on to medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata is the last posterior most region which is club shaped tapering end which connects to the spinal cord. This medulla oblongata, pons as well as the cerebellum forms the brainstem, that is nothing but the fourth ventricle. The medulla oblongata is also an very important functions of cardiovascular system that are involved in the blood as well as also the movement of the contractions of the heart and also the movement of the blood. The cavities which are found on the brain are called as ventricles. So, these ventricles are lined by the epidermal cells, and the lateral ventricles which are found on the cerebrum region is the first as well as the second ventricles. So, this ventricles continues itself into the diencephalon region called as diocele. So, this diocele is having a ventricle between the forebrain, the region called as foramen of Monaro. So, this foramen of Monaro is the ventricles that are found between the diencephalon as well as the midbrain. So, within the midbrain there is an enlargement of the vessels, and this what we called as the ventricles and also found called as the hitter. So, this hitter is the one cavity that are found within the third ventricles. Below the hitters there is a mesencephalon. This mesencephalon region is also having an vesicles called as the mesocele. So, this mesocele forms and the fourth ventricle which are all connected to the spinal cord. The ventricles or the cavities that are found within the brain are filled with a fluid called as the cerebrospinal fluid. So, this cerebrospinal fluid communicates with the spinal cord as well as within the central canals. So, this cavities of the brain is a very important communicating system from the brain to the spinal cord. Spinal cord is the one which innervates from the base of the brain to the lumbar vertebra of our body. So, this spinal cord is a whitish gelatinous tubular structure that innervates, but it is cylindrical in structure supported by within the vertebra. So, this spinal cord is similar in all the vertebrates. So, if the spinal cord is taken and transverse section, this transverse section of the spinal cord gives rise to an H-shaped structure which also contains an gray as well as the white matter. The gray in color because of the presence of the numerous nerve cells, whereas white in color because of the presence of numerous nerve myelin fibers, and that is why they are differentiated into an gray matter as well as the white matter. So, the arms are thrown out by the spinal cord called as the dorsal arm as well as the ventral arm. The dorsal arm region carries an motor what are called as sensory nerves, whereas the ventral region carries the motor nerves. The dorsal regions as well as the ventral region joined each other within the spinal cord, thereby the impulses are passed from the brain to the various part of our body, either with the afferent as well as the efferent nerves, and that is why they are acting as a two-way system of the spinal cord. So, the spinal cord is the very important conduction of impulses in both the ways, that is carrying impulse to the brain and passing the impulse from the brain to the various part of our body. So, dear students, there are types of peripheral nervous system which consist of the cranial nerves as well as the spinal nerves. The cranial nerves are those nerves which innervates from the brain to the neck region. So, these cranial nerves are mainly 12 pairs in number in case of human as well as in other higher vertebrates. So, these 12 pairs of the cranial nerves are like olfactory, optical, trigeminal, auditory, vagus, glossopharyngeal, hypopharyngeal. These are some of the different cranial nerves which are given an Roman letter 1 to 12 in number. So, these cranial nerves are either an motor or sensory, or sometimes they are the mixed nerves which transmit impulses to the brain to the different of the neck regions. Whereas this 10th cranial nerve called as the vagus nerve, that transmits the nerve from the brain to the visceral part of our body like heart, stomach as well as the intestine. Coming to the spinal nerves, the spinal nerves are 31 in number, pairs in number in case of vertebrates, which are distributed from the brain to the lumbar regions of our body. Among these 31 pairs of the spinal nerves, the 8 pairs are the cervical nerves, and the 5 pairs are the thoracic nerves, and 5 pairs are the lumbar nerves, and also the 1 pair is the coccygeal. So, there are 31 pairs of the spinal nerves which are either an sensory or which are sensory, motor and mixed type of nerves. The spinal nerves are either two-way direction that carries impulses to the brain and which transmit impulse from the brain to the various part of our body. The spinal nerve consists of two roots of nerves, the dorsal root as well as the ventral root. The dorsal root which mainly carries an sensory nerves, whereas the ventral root carries the motor nerves. So, both the nerves get mixed each other, and that is why the spinal nerves are either a sensory, motor as well as the mix that transmit the impulses through afferent as well as the efferent fibers to the various parts of our body. Dear students, now let us understand about the comparative account of brain in vertebrates. The comparative accounts of brain in vertebrates are built up with the same basic architectural plan. They are all of a similar structure with the having three important parts, the forebrain, midbrain as well as the hindbrain. So, now the structure differs from one vertebra to the another vertebra based upon the animals which are resides, that is their habitats, and also the behavior of the particular animals. Now, let us understand about the brain of the shark. So, the brain of the shark is similar in structure with our having three important forebrain, midbrain as well as the hindbrain. But the shark brain is much advanced compared to the lower fishes like cyclostomes as well as the lamprey. So, in case of the shark brain, the forebrain is having a very large optical lobes which are found within the optical sac, and also the peduncles which are attached to the anterior regions of the cerebrum. The cerebrum is not divided like that of mammals, but it is an compact structure of the cerebra without any what is called as convolutions. The lower regions of the cerebra is connected with the midbrain by a nerve ring called as saccus vasculosus. This midbrain or the what we call as upper regions of the midbrain, that is the diencephalon, it is produce itself into an pineal body, or we also call this as the epiphysis cerebrae. So, there are two cross optical cerebrae or the nerves which are interconnected within the diencephalon region. The floor of the diencephalon is having the infundibulum. This infundibulum is produced itself into a stalk-like structure called the pituitary body, or also called as hypophysis cerebra. These optical lobes which are found on the diencephalons are produced itself into an two mammalian bodies called as the lobi inferior. The midbrain, which is also produced into an optical lobes which are concerned with the sight of the what we call as vision. So, now below this midbrain there is a region called as the hindbrain, consists of the medulla oblongata as well as the cerebellum. The cerebrum hemisphere, which are found within the hindbrains, are divided by what we call as the divisions, and also the medulla oblongata joins itself with the spinal cord. The regions where the medulla oblongata which also joins, they produce itself into a two body called as corpus restiformis, which is also found in case of the brain of shark. So, the brain of shark is similar in their structure, but it advanced when compared to that of the lower fishes. Let us understand about the brain of a frog. With the terrestrialization, the frog brain is more advanced than that of the fishes. It consists of an forebrain with the cerebrum as well as the diencephalon. The cerebrum is quite larger, and then anterior region of the cerebrum is having an two slender thick optical lobes. These optical lobes that are connected to the anterior region are having an floor of the diencephalon. So, the diencephalon is the region which is produced itself into an pallial body or epiphysis. Below that it is having an infundibulum that produce itself into the what we call as the pituitary body or the hypophysis. The cerebral hemisphere is very small in case of frog. The midbrain is produced itself into an two large optical lobes that are cross connected with the optical chiasma. The cerebral hemisphere is very shorter in connection with the less activities of the muscles. In case of frog, the midbrain consists of the medulla oblongata is connected with the spinal cord, and there are 10 pairs of the cranial nerves as seen in case of the fishes. Now, let us move on to the brain of the reptile. With the complete terrestrialization of the reptiles, the reptile brain is much advanced than the amphibians as well as the fishes. The forebrain of the reptiles is produced into a very long olfactory lobules with the olfactory peduncle attached to the anterior region of the cerebrum. The cerebrum is divided into two small cerebral hemisphere by a longitudinal median fissures. So, this longitudinal median fissures are having a lower regions of crura cerebrae. This crura cerebrae produce itself into a diencephalon. The diencephalon is having an region called as the optical chiasma, which are formed by the crossing of the two nerves. The optical chiasma produces itself into a small body called as pituitary body, or also which we call as the hypophysis. The roof of this pituitary body is having the pineal body, and also we call as epiphysis cerebrae, or which we call as connecting between the forebrain as well as the midbrain. It produces itself into a two large optical lobes. These optical lobes are also having an good sight of vision. Below this optical lobes, there is an region that are going to connect to the midbrain, consists of the cerebrum as well as the what is called as medulla oblongata. The cerebrum is ill connected as that of the frog and which are connected with the muscle activities. The medulla oblongata is the fourth ventricle that produces itself into myoceles that consist of an connecting link between the spinal cords. So, the reptile's brain is more advanced with the cerebrum and also the presence of the large optical bulb which is connected to the nasal chamber that is concerned with the smell. Brain of a bird is with a good aerial mode of their life and also with the higher vision that are produced is much advanced than that brain of the reptiles. So, in the brain of the birds, you can see the forebrain is produced itself into an large cerebral hemisphere divided by the median fissures. These fissures are connected by the corpora striatum. So, anterior regions of the cerebrum is having a very small optical lobes. The surface region, the cortex of the cerebrum is having the pallium which is divided into neopallium as well as the paleopallium. The diencephalon region is having an pallial bodies and also the pineal bodies that are having found at the third ventricle which we called as iter or acquidens of Salvians. This diencephalons is also having an infundibulum that are connected to the pituitary bodies or also hypophyseal cerebrae. The midbrain consists of two large optical lobes that are connected by the optical chiasma and which are concerned mainly with the sense of vision in case of birds. In birds, even if they are in the higher altitudes, they can seek the objects very clearly because of the presence of the two large optical lobes at the midbrain. The hindbrain consists of a very large cerebellum. This cerebellum is divided into by a fissure called as cerebral hemispheres. The cerebral hemispheres are connected together by a vermi and also there is a number of folds called as flocculi or also we call this as the folio. The medulla oblongata which is connected to the fourth ventricles or the what we called as myocele, it is having an very important region that connects between the spinal cord as well as medulla oblongata called as ventral flexus. So, the brain of a bird is much advanced when compared to the brain of a reptiles as well as the amphibians with the presence of two large optical lobes and also the large cerebral hemisphere which is in smooth surface. Brain of mammal is 10 times larger than the brain of what are called as the birds and reptiles. The brain of mammal is produced itself with the brain box or skull which are also called as the cranium, which are produced by three important membranes or meninges which are supplied with the blood vessels. The three important meninges are the inner pyomaters, the outer duramaters and the arachnoids. The forebrain consists of the cerebrum as well as the diencephalons. The cerebrum is very large in structure divided by the longitudinal fissures and they are produced into a surface called as the pallium. The pallium is having three important layers called as neopallium, archaeopallium as well as paleopallium. The cortex are produced into numerous convolutions. These convolutions are called as the gyri and the gyri is grey in color which is a grey matter which is because of the presence of the nerve cells are also called as the cytoplasms of the nerves. So, this gyri are also produced into a deep fissures called as the sulci. So, this cerebral hemisphere are connected each other by the corpus callosum, which is unheard in the case of other vertebrates. This corpus callosum that connects between the two cerebral hemispheres produce itself into a diencephalon. The diencephalon is having a three important bilaterally symmetrical regions called as the thalami, hypothalami as well as the epithalamus. The thalamus forms at the side walls of the ventricles. Below the thalamus is the hypothalamus that is produce itself into an epithalamic region which are connected with the infundibulum that are having a pituitary body. The pituitary body is the master gland of the endocrine gland that regulates the various endocrine hormones of our body. The cerebral Balam is the main concern of intelligence, memory, consciousness and also the what we call as the judgment. This diencephalons as well as the cerebrum which forms the forebrain leads into the midbrain that is having a large optical lobes. So, there are 4 pairs of optical lobes called as corpora quadrigemina. So, this corpora quadrigemina is because of the presence of the 2 anterior optical lobes as well as the 2 posterior optical lobes. The midbrain that is having the optical lobes leads into an hindbrain consists of pons, cerebral hemisphere as well as the medulla oblongata. Pons is the region that connects between the diencephalon with the hindbrain. So, the cerebral hemisphere are connected by the vermi which are produced into numerous folds called as the foliae, and this foliae produce itself into a tree of branches or arbora vitae. The pons which connects the midbrain is also having the medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata is the region which is triangular in structure that connects between the spinal cord. The medulla oblongata, pons as well as the diencephalon are the midbrain which forms the brain stem of our mammal brains. So, this is mainly concerned with the respiration, circulation as well as the heartbeats. So, dear students, so far that you have learned about the comparative account of the brain which are all made up of the 3 important regions, that is the forebrain, midbrain as well as the hindbrain, but their structure and morphology differs with the habit of an animal and also the behavior of an animal. So, dear students, until now in this unit you have learned about the development of the brain and also the differentiation and morphological comparison of the different brains in the vertebrates.